Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Dircz, the Deputy Director of Marketing and Communications at Headstrong. We're a national facing mental health treatment practice aimed at healing the hidden wounds of war in our military connected veterans and their families. In this Meaning of the Minds episode, we are joined by professional big mountain skier, two-time queen of Corvettes, and the North Face sponsored athlete, Caite Zeliff. Caite, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Right on. With our Meeting of the Mind series, our goal is to participate in open discussions about different aspects of mental wellness and treatment. The topics we discuss today will revolve around your expertise and how it applies to those who are either currently in treatment, those wanting to educate themselves on available resources, and even those that are struggling with the common stigma that's attached to seeking treatment. So, with that, we'll just jump right in. Pardon the pun. So, Caite, some of our viewers may be wondering the connection between big mountain skiing and what Headstrong is doing in the mental health space with our veterans and their families. Oftentimes, athletes, much like our military veterans, have a public perception that their training regimen focuses on the physical component, or that bodily strength is what really makes a high performing athlete. Over the course of the last 20 years or so, we've come to embrace this concept of sports psychology, and that peak performance is achieved through a combination of both physical and mental. As you've progressed in your career from a competitive racer to a big mountain skier, can you share with us how you first discovered this need to combine your physical training with psychological? And was there like a tipping point or something for you, or a moment where you said, gosh, I really need help?
I think there was a couple different moments where I felt that maybe if I paid more attention to the mental aspects, I would find more success. The first one being in high school when I was a competitive ski racer. I was skiing at FIS and NORAM levels, which means I was traveling around the world, racing internationally. And I found that I was really struggling with performance anxiety. I would have no problem training. And in my trainings, I would be very fast. And then if I would actually be in a proper race or competition, I would just get stiff and struggle to ski the ways that I was in training. So I started just doing research on my own and playing with mindfulness techniques as simple as meditation and starting to seek out kind of what opportunities were out there. I also found that in that time of really competitive ski racing, um, I actually got asked to try out for the US ski team and didn't make the team and found myself in depression for the first time in my life. Just it was like my biggest childhood dream. I worked really hard for it and it kind of fell apart. And so I think that was maybe those two things were kind of my first just kind of um, my first experience even playing with the mental side, because prior to that it was all physical training all the time, skiing in South America in the summers and just making sure I was grinding because ultimately that's what I knew at that point in my athletic career. So I would say those times in high school kind of like a peek into the possibilities. And then I started big mountain professional skiing here in Jackson, Wyoming. And like you said, I won the Queen of Corbett's competition back to back, and it opened a lot of these doors for me. And as I started filming with Teton Gravity Research, I'm mic'd up every single day when I'm out in the field filming. And I went back and watched a lot of that footage, and I was doing things at the top of my lines that I didn't realize I was doing. These rituals to calm down fear, these techniques of whether it was breathing or a mantra I told myself to calm myself down. And so I kind of just found I was pretty fascinated by kind of this potential leg up that I could find if I were to do some training. So yeah, it started in high school with just needing to calm my nerves. And then I kind of saw the second time it came around this opportunity to, I've been training hard. I'm really strong. And I kind of feel at some places I'm plateauing in that way, but there's still so much I can explore on the mental side, especially as I'm getting older. And so I would say it was a combination of those two experiences that led me to exploring more of the mental side of the training.
That's super cool. So you're working with a licensed sports psychologist currently, correct?
I am.
That's great.
Yeah,
And
it's
so,
really huge for me because I feel as if sometimes as an athlete you're so involved in your sport. And like when you first reached out to me about the premise of Headstrong, I definitely didn't think about the ties that there are between athletes and veterans. I think as an athlete I make this choice, in some ways, and if you decide to join the armed forces you make a choice as well. But I think I started to understand a couple of things as you were making these ties and these parallels that do um, yeah, it's just a fascinating study. But Chris is the woman that I work with, the sports psychologist, and she's been incredibly helpful of just like when I'm in it and I'm too far obsessed with the objective or whatever it might be, she's able to like bring me out of my head. And so I can kind of look at, maybe just take a step back and look through the process. And so just having her expertise and understanding how the mind works and how fear works is just such a different level because she's got a PhD in it, like she knows so much. That's super helpful. And the really interesting part about the footage that I was going through that I brought up that made me kind of take another peek at what I could do on the mental side was I skied this line in the TGR film last year where at the bottom I say, wow, I just blacked out. Like in the video, it says that. And we dissected that, and she said that that was because I was operating in a place of fear and I was blacking out because my body was protecting me because it thought that I was going through trauma because of what a large task it was and how much fear I was feeling. And so that was eye opening to me because I thought that that was flow state. I thought that when you had no recollection of what happened, that was a good thing because your body took over. But actually, I'm not. I'm like completely just pushing down fear and not listening. And so that's like ultimately what I've been working on this season is listening to the fear and allowing the fear to come in and honoring it instead of just like shoving it down, because ultimately down the road, if you continue to do that, there are lots, it just presents itself in different ways if you don't listen to your fear.
Wow, yeah, you're so lucky that, you're able to, look at that footage, or you're mic'd up to be able to hear that. I mean, I remember when I was racing competitively, I had times where I would forget to breathe. Like,
Oh yeah.
even though it's like a natural occurrence, right? And so you're in, when I was in a racing situation, and thankfully I was racing in Minnesota, so there were 30-second courses, not minute and a half, so it wasn't killing me, going through the course. But yeah, when you finish and you're just like, you realize I was so out of breath, and it was my coach had asked me too, like, are you breathing? I'm like, I don't
I
know,
don't
am
know.
I? Well, like how you attain to that, right? There's certain things like in the psychological, you attain to things while you ignore others. So is there any other things like, when you're out there, like thinking about attainment, when you're in the zone, as you said, like a flow state, like, what does it feel like for you?
Well, to be honest, I think I was really confusing what flow state was. So up until 2 months ago, I would say that it felt, well, I think I have felt it in some ways, and I think I'm just understanding how to feel it all the time. But when you get, my personal experience is when I get into that flow state, it's kind of a slower pace in a sense of, I don't know how this happens as far as like on a psychological level or like, I don't know how the brain does it, but it does feel as if everything is heightened. And I think it's in those moments where I know and my body knows that every single movement I do has to be precise because ultimately, like in some of these positions, if I go down, it's like it's a no fall zone. And so I think there's a certain heightened awareness that your body can slip into. And it, from my perspective, just slows things down. And it almost gets kind of like I wear a helmet, obviously, but like I'm in
Mhm.
this, like the sounds don't come through, like I block out everything. It's just very much like what is going on right ahead of me. And I actually think a lot of athletes crave it because you can't think about anything else. It's like this incredible focus that I haven't found anywhere else. Climbers talk about it
Mhm.
quite a bit, but you kind of just drop into this like, I don't know, grounded place where your body's doing all the work and your mind stops for a minute, which quite frankly is like a very beautiful place to be. And I think as I've operated more this year, being okay with my fear and honoring my fear, I've noticed that flow state is more a more like f- well, flowy for lack of a better word, instead of like rigid like ski racer, it's more when I'm in it, I don't have to fight as hard and things just happen. Muscle memory is a beautiful thing. And so my experience mostly is just that heightened awareness and things slow down and I'm able to operate the exact way that I've been training for the past whatever 20 something years.
Absolutely. It's almost like an awesome pow day, when you're out there
Yeah.
and all you hear is this. When you're floating and it's just those are awesome days for sure. Well, thinking of that, no fall zone, it's a good segue into the next topic. Let's talk about injury, which is
Yeah.
something in your line of work you're no stranger to. So, one of the most difficult things for a professional athlete is to overcome is returning back to peak performance from an injury. So, what are the psychological effects? And I understand they can be devastating, but how are you able to overcome that? Because I understand, you've had a pretty hardcore injury a little while ago, and I'm sure that still kind of sticks with you. But how do you overcome that and move on?
There's kind of a funny joke in the outdoors, mostly ski community, and it can be interchanged, but the one that I heard most recently that resonated was mountaineers are the quickest to forget or like have the worst memories. And I think big mountain skiing is the same way because I don't know if it's like a blackout, like you black it out, you ignore it. It's like a trauma based reaction. I don't know how that works, but um, my most recent injury that you were talking about, it was a tibial plateau fracture, and it happened in a pretty aggressive manner. It was like it's difficult to explain, but it's a line that's out of bounds. So I'm out of the range of ski patrol. I'm very much human powered on my own, and it was a 15 or 20-foot mandatory air off a cliff into a couloir. So on either side are really long, like rock walls. And when I was in the couloir, the snow was awesome. And when I exited the couloir and it didn't have the shade from the sun, it went to a sun crest. And I went to make a turn and just like very violently tomahawked. And I had heard noises, all the things that you hear when you crash and you don't want to hear. And so I took a quick assessment and I just knew that I actually thought I blew my ACL because I knew what that was like and it was somewhat similar. And I think my head went to worst case scenario. So basically, I knew I had a matter of maybe an hour to get out of there on adrenaline. Regardless of what happened, I needed to use the adrenaline to get out. And I think because it was such a saga as far as like the crash was gnarly, but then I had adrenaline and I got out of there. And then by the time I was at the hospital, I had enough time to like kind of compartmentalize the fact that I hurt myself. You just know sometimes. And so I had already shifted my mindset to recovery and rehab. And I was lucky because it was in March. So I knew I had most of my season. I had done everything I could and I just pivoted the mind. And I don't know where that stems from. It's not like a training or I've never been taught that, but I do think it's a certain mindset or maybe this like insane obsession I have with this dream of like, doesn't matter. It's not going to stop me. Like I'm so stubborn and I'm so like that it wasn't even an option to think about. And I think that is, I talk about nature versus nurture quite often because my mom, I was raised by a single mother and she's like, doesn't like the outdoors. She's very mellow. She like is very feminine and lovely and likes to cook. And she just doesn't quite understand why I like the things that I do. And neither do I, but it's just such like an innate drive that, yeah. So to answer your question, it was right around COVID when COVID hit. So I also had the distraction of wondering what was going on with the world and all the mayhem to kind of distract me in some ways, as well as not having what I call like FOMO, fear of missing out. So I was able to heal when I knew that no one else was skiing and no one else was doing anything. And I had this really amazing opportunity to heal. And so I put my head down and I got back. I was off my leg for 8 weeks and then was fully back within like a couple of months. It was like a very quick recovery. I think I had so much time and energy to put towards it that it was inevitable. And then before I started filming, I had this like weird feeling that came over my body that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting that I had handled it. I was like, I don't have any PTSD or anything of that nature. And then the night or 2 nights before we were going to start going and skiing big lines again, and potentially the line that I got hurt on, I started to have those feelings creep in. And it kind of shook me because when you're skiing at this level, you can't really be distracted by anything and you can't really like have any bit of doubt in your mind that something bad's going to happen. So I was nervous that this would mess with my performance or my ability to get into that flow state. And quite honestly, I just worked through it. Like I didn't really, it was a real concern and I voiced it actually out loud, which I think helped a lot. My best friend is one of the producers who manages the athletes at TGR and helps us talk to filmers and where we're going to ski. And I was very honest with her about how I was feeling and just voiced it. And she's like, Kate, That's very normal. Like that's something that if you told me you didn't feel that way would be more concerning. And I think just allowing myself to understand that that's okay and that it doesn't mean I'm gonna get hurt again, and it doesn't mean that I'm a weak skier, or it doesn't mean that I can't handle this career path. It's just like allowing myself to feel that emotion in the same ways that I'm allowing myself to feel fear was just really helpful, and kind of instead of festering and letting it kind of rock me, I just felt it and wasn't stoked that I was feeling it. But on the other side, because I allowed myself to feel it, it was done.
And it's amazing the power of verbalization, right? So just by saying it and speaking it out loud it gives you and as you said, talking with your best friend, it's almost like talking with the therapist too when you're when you're going through treatment. It's like just being able to verbalize it and own it in a way, like, yeah, I'm freaked out right now and it's okay, because then I think that also helps. It's like your body almost then listens and the connection, comes together, because then your body, you can sense like things just start to kind of slow down. Then, your heart rate might have been up and you're like kind of like, oh, tweaking out a little bit. And then all of a sudden, if you're talking about it, yeah, you feel it. It just it naturally kind of subsides. So I think that's one of the great powers, I think, of having and talking to a therapist, because they're there to help you, guide you through those feelings and help you verbalize those things. So,
Yeah.
so very interesting stuff. And
So
so, yeah, when it comes to, knowing that you had, the injury and coming back from it, is there any other thing? I know you say you kind of push it out of the back of your mind, but are there any other kind of practices that you put in place, before, even as you're going into this next situation of, dropping into something huge or something? Like what do you mentally practice to get yourself prepared?
Skiers use a lot of visualization. So
Mhm.
before I go up to the run, like the night before, we make the decision of what we're going to ski, depending on conditions and light and wind and all the things.
Mhm.
And 9 times out of 10, I'm really lucky to be of this generation of skiers, but there's a lot of ski movies that happen in Jackson, and that's where I'm working right now. So I go back through the archives and I actually try to find the exact line that I'm looking to go ski, and I watch
That's
my
awesome.
favorite skier ski it, and then I sit with it. We oftentimes have photos, and so I'll like just think about this photo and kind of picture myself skiing it. And some skiers are more intense with their visualization in the sense where like they use their hands as their skis and they get fully into it. And I go back and forth on that. But definitely that's a huge technique that we use, as well as what we just were discussing. Like my mountain partners are the closest people in my life. And if I'm nervous and I'm kind of like, feel that, I can voice that to them and we can talk through it. And there's definitely a difference, at least in our realm, between fear of hurting ourselves because it's a crazy act and that gut fear or that gut feeling that maybe is telling us to back off because there's something else at work. And the really beautiful thing about the community that I surround myself with is it's a very spiritual group of people, but you wouldn't even expect it because ski bums and spirituality don't necessarily go hand in hand. But because we're in the mountains, because there's so much at play, it really is like you have this like kind of relationship with your landscapes, and we know that it's more powerful than us, and so we have this understanding. But back to a point you made just a second ago on I like the talking to people, and I feel like just like kind of to run that parallel, I for a long time felt really lonely because I think really differently, I act really differently, especially as a female. For a long time, I thought there was like maybe something wrong with my fear receptors, or there was like something that was like off, and I wouldn't talk about these things that I wanted to do because 9 times out of 10, if I talk to someone, they'd be like, "What are you talking about? You're a crazy person." And I'm like, "It makes sense. Look at it. Like, let me show you. Like, I'm not crazy. It's actually really reasonable." And so until I started operating with Teton Gravity Research, who has the best athletes in the world on doing their films, I didn't have a community where anyone understood. And so just having those people to kind of like, even like a good example is we've had so much powder here in Jackson this year, and that's awesome. Powder's so fun. But my like favorite thing to do is jump off big cliffs and ski big lines. And I kind of said something to this guy in the lift line who's kind of a legend here at Jackson, and it's like, I'm just starting to get a little bored. And I felt like bad saying that because these powder days are like people's, like they dream about this. This is like, yeah, like the best powder days you could ever imagine. He's like, I totally get it. He's like, I've been talking to my girlfriend about it, and like, quite frankly, I feel bad about it. And just having someone, whether it's someone else that has been through a similar experience but can just wrap their head around it and make you feel less crazy, I think that's been very comforting over the past couple of years as I've continued to push myself or come back from injury, because people look at me, especially again as a woman, and I kept hitting my face on my knees last year, so broken nose, eyes, blood, just like kind of look like a mess. And a lot of people would be like, is this worth it? Like, are you crazy? Like, are you pushing it too hard? And there would be a handful of people that I'd call and check in and be like, am I crazy? Like, am I pushing it too hard? Just having that community is really helpful, because otherwise sometimes you do feel crazy if you don't have someone that can be like, I get it. We're both crazy, but we're in it together.
I totally get you. I'm crazy too. So I know when I used to study, I actually studied sports psychology in my undergraduate as well, and I was working on a thesis on like the sensation seeking personality trait. And I think that
Whoa.
is very common amongst skiers. And it's like going bigger, going harder, going faster, and it's like you find
Yeah.
yourselves kind of attracted to those same people. So when you're all out there, it's almost like, oh my God, you get a gaggle of us together and it's danger. Watch out, because we're
Yeah.
going to go big. But it's a very interesting topic. It's like some people kind of equate it to, drug addicts. It's
Oh,
though the adrenaline is our drug. It's our drug of choice. I mean, I love jumping out of airplanes. I love doing
yeah.
that kind of stuff. I like putting myself in these kind of situations because they make me feel more alive. Talking about fear, and that's a really great segue into kind of our final topic that I really is super excited to talk to you about, and knowing about your seminar. So you recently completed the seminar, and I know as humans, we have this natural fight or flight response, right? So some of us are more prone to run towards it while others run away from it. So of course, big mountain skiers and our servicemen and women, they definitely fall in in the run to it category. So whether it's like sending into corvettes or knowingly walking into like a potentially deadly combat situation, the fear really is real. With that in mind, can you share with us like some of your key learnings from the seminar and how it applies to like your mental health practice now?
Absolutely. So to premise, the seminar I went to is this woman named Kristen Ulmer, who was the best female skier of the 90s. She competed at a very
Mhm.
high level for 12 years, and then just like dropped off the scene pretty hard. And I actually was introduced to her and her teachings and her book through um, a friend's father, and he kind of just gave me a very vague idea that she had, after her ski career, started studying fear and the effects of fear on the body, and also kind of like our relationship with fear. I think in Western society, we are taught to um, ignore fear, overcome fear, like all of those things. And that's definitely how I was raised, by a very strong single mother. It was like, you got this, like, you're good, you're strong, like all of these things, which is like 100% awesome. But I think I always kind of understood that fear was a weakness, and if you could overcome it, you'd be better off. And so for a long time, I suppressed fear. And I basically went to this seminar and realized that suppressing fear is a really unhealthy way of approaching it, and it works temporarily. But if you look at anyone that's considered fearless, like Lindsey Vonn, I think is a good example, because she's seen as fearless. She's an absolute animal, like arguably the best downhill skier, female skier ever to live. And that being said, if you dive a bit deeper, she is riddled with injuries. She's got a like sleep, she struggles to sleep. I don't know what it is, like some sleep disorder as well as like anxiety disorders. And basically my understanding is if you suppress fear long enough, it will start to present itself in other ways. So even if you think that maybe like the knee injury couldn't be tied to it, or the anxiety couldn't be tied to it, ultimately it's you pushing down that fear and getting more rigid and more like stuck. And ultimately, especially in my career path, leads to injuries if you're not flowing and feeling all of the things that you need to feel. So, but prior to this camp, I would say this mantra at the top of a line, which was, I release my fear to my higher self with love and light as chosen experiences. And Kristen Ulmer, who was my teacher, who gets it and knows exactly what I'm doing, goes, Caite, fear isn't like CO2. You can't just release it into the atmosphere. And I was like, wow, like, right, but I really, wow, I think I'm enlightened, like, I've got a mantra, like, this works great for me. But as I learned more about that, I realized that ultimately it was working temporarily, but because I have been using this technique for the past 10 to 15 years, I was starting to notice, like, certain things kind of rearing its angry head that may have been a result of suppressing fear, whether it be depression in the sense of not wanting to go skiing or not. I think like your body kind of is like, oh God, we're gonna go and she's gonna suppress fear and jump off these things, and like we don't like that. I don't know. That's how I say my body acts. So I kind of understood that fear and all of our emotions are presented for a certain reason, and if we aren't able or willing to listen to them, it's kind of doing ourselves a disservice. And if you listen to them even for a minute, they tend to quiet, and it sounds a little woo woo and heady, and but I've been practicing it all throughout the season, and I'll get on a line and I'll just be like, whoa, I'm kind of scared, and then I'll be like, well, I'm sitting on top of a 25 footer and the landing's not great and the light's not great and it could be hard down there. That's a pretty normal thing. Like, okay, I'm scared. I'm scared. I'm scared. And I run through that process of honoring it and feeling it. And then it just kind of goes away. And the teachings from the seminar that kind of take it into the next step is once you've let your body and mind voice their opinions, then it's on you to transition into the new state of being that you want to take it on. So she kind of talks about it in the way of operating within different voices. And what I took from that is I've been kind of putting myself in the place of my favorite skiers in some lines. So, like, if it's a super big line, I'll be like, all right, we're going to channel Elise Ogstead on this one. And I just like kind of put myself into like this hard, chargy mindset. Or another funny one, as far as the voices go, is um, like making ski movies is very creative, but I also
Mhm.
need that masculine chargy energy. So I say I want to create with the divine masculine, and it's like, or arrogance. There's like a couple different voices depending on the line that I get into, and it's funny because arrogance. When she brought that one up, I was like, I don't want to ski in arrogance. That sounds lame. It doesn't sound like what I want to do. And then you realize that arrogance actually, the definition, like socially, you get this idea, but basically it was just like confidence. It was
Yeah.
like, oh, I got this, and just kind of dropping into these different things. I also find like if I'm feeling the fluttery feeling, I'm excited. I'm like, oh, I'm excited, and I play into those things, and I try to even like get into the place of gratitude before dropping, and it takes me completely from, oh my God, I'm so scared. And I run this roller coaster of like listening and letting it happen, and then being like, no, I'm excited. And then be like, I'm so lucky to have this opportunity. Like, look at this. And then I'm disillusioned and I jump off of it. And 9 times out of 10, it goes great. And the other time, maybe I get hurt, but that's just how it goes.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I know, obviously me being a skier as well is like when you're skiing arrogantly or confidently, don't you feel like you are more forward? You're more on top of your skis because then
Like,
if yeah, you're getting the back seat, and the next thing you know is like you're back there hanging out, just like because yeah, you almost feel like you're flailing. But if you own it and you're on it, it's like you feel like you're more centered over your skis, and you definitely get better turns out of it. So I totally hear you. I feel you on that one. That's super cool. Very
yeah.
cool. Well, right on. Thinking about this whole conversation, it's just been really, really just interesting. It's kind of bringing me back to my days and just making me miss the mountain right now too. I know you're sitting there in Jackson. I used to make an annual trip out to Utah, and I actually just shared a video with a girlfriend of mine did her first drop into the Catherines area up at Alta and shared her footage with me and made me all jealous. So super jealous of you being able to get out there and a very awesome season too. So I just want to say thank you so much, for the time you spent with us today. But just a final thought and a final question. If you had any key takeaways, from our conversation today. I know we've talked before this as well, and what it is we're doing here at Headstrong, and as you said, how it kind of relates to where you are in your mental health practice. Is there any kind of key takeaways that you would kind of, I guess, take from this conversation?
Yeah, I think the two things that come to mind immediately are kind of just how hard we are on ourselves all the time, and the understanding that feeling these things doesn't make you weak. And like you said, kind of spearheading that and taking it head on is the strongest thing you can do, even if asking for help seems weak or verbalizing your fears seems like. I know there's a lot of men in my life definitely who feel like if they say anything about their emotional well-being, that's like just weak and not how it should be. And I'm the same way as like a professional athlete. I feel like I need to always be happy and be strong and not be scared and be ready. And ultimately, that's like it's unsustainable. You can't keep that up. And so, just understanding that you're not weak for voicing how you're feeling, and it helps in the long run to be even stronger. As well as the other thing that came to mind was for me, and just a reminder is like to call on the people in your life that do understand, because every time I walk away from one of those conversations where I've been vulnerable and I've expressed some emotion that I probably didn't want to bring up because I felt that it wasn't the me that I wanted to present to the world. I've always left those conversations feeling empowered and feeling far better and feeling like there's people out there that get it. So I think those would be my two takeaways. And yeah, take care of yourself. I don't know. It's a funny world we're living in, and I'm trying to do that every day. It's wild out
Oh,
there.
please tell me about it. It's like I feel like I'm in so in a little bubble within a bubble within a bubble. It's like Inception world over here, and that yeah, you just don't know how to get out of it. And even what is normal now? I know
Totally.
everybody's struggling with that, and what is going to be this new sense of normal when we come out of this kind of fearful situation that we're all living in right now, and how do you come out of it on the other side? And I really appreciate you talking about the fear and owning it, and that it's okay to break that stigma, that to ask for help, it's okay. And especially in the way that our society is right now, we all could use a little help. you know so on
Absolutely.
that note, I just like to say in closing, here at Headstrong, we believe in showing the vulnerability to be a key first step in the healing process. So, our Meeting of the Mind series was kind of developed to explore these various perspectives in the pursuit of removing all of these barriers and the stigmas that often impede us seeking and receiving mental health treatment. So I really just want to thank you for sharing, and through your knowledge and wisdom, you're actually assisting us in our mission. So I just want to say thank you once again, Caite, and we wish you so much success in your career. And I hope to see you participate in the Queen of Corvettes once again, and dominate. But I guess I'll be seeing you on film, and maybe if I get to stop in Jackson Hole one of these days, we might be able to make some turns together. It would be awesome.
I love that. Yeah, thanks for having me and taking the time, but give a shout if you're ever in Jackson.
Right on. Thanks again, Caite. Take care.
Yeah, see ya.